Well, welcome everybody. We're here for another session of In the First. Tonight we have our guest is Kevin Hensley, who's a state representative in the 9th Representative District. Kevin, thanks for being here.
It's an honor. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
And obviously you have the same team here. You have Rob Close and Chris Baronio.
Hello. I'll be
And,
Bob Farr tonight.
You're gonna do what?
Rob Close, Bob Farr.
Rob Close, Bob Farr. Okay,
Yep.
I like it. Right, pretty good. So, well, before we get started, we're filming on Wednesday, the 15th of January, and a couple of big items in the news. The Senate confirmation hearings have started for President Trump's cabinet nominees. Pete Hegseth was yesterday. Fiery, to say the least.
Entertaining.
Very entertaining. Not a whole lot about policy from the Democrats, and as they wanted to drag up dirt. But I thought that Hegseth did fantastic, and he's got the solid support from the Republicans. So he will be the nominee, and I say thank goodness for that, because the Pentagon needs a change. He's coming in with the mindset of making that change, and he's a warrior. Who's coming in to make the Pentagon be more warrior-like and not to appease to the consultants and the retired admirals who make a lot of money on defense contracts. So that's my personal opinion. So I think that's good. Today we had Pam Bondi. I saw a little bit of it, and she seemed to do well. Marco Rubio, I thought, in what I heard, he did very well. He was very, very in-depth answers to questions, and I don't know if there's anybody else that went up because I was tied up.
I think those are the big three.
Yeah, work got in the way. The other news is that there apparently is a deal to release the hostages in the Middle East, and so somewhat of a peace deal. I believe that Joe Biden is taking credit for listening to Donald Trump and making sure that he got it done before President Trump becomes president, or hell's going to break loose. So we'll see what that is. Some comments from the people in Israel, some saying, hey, this is great. Some are not so happy, so we'll have to wait. And I haven't really seen many details, but that's obviously good to get the hostages released. And the wildfires are still going on in California with devastation, and there was also some news down in western North Carolina and parts of eastern Tennessee, still not getting any support. People are living in tents in the cold, and so I don't know why they're having a problem getting any assistance, but they are. So those are kind of the big issues. Anything else, guys? Kind of like the big thing. So
Those are the big headlines.
all right.
Haven't heard anything about drones lately.
No, haven't heard anything about drones. But Tucker did come out that he received some information from somebody in the intel community that said that the drones are actually Chinese, that they were being controlled by a satellite, and that we took the satellite out.
So yeah, I did see that. There was some stuff, flying through the atmosphere one night, and
Yep.
people are like, "Hey, something's
That's-
burning up."
That's the satellite that we
And
took
that
out.
is the rumor that was a
Interesting.
Chinese
That's the
satellite
rumor.
used
That's
to
what
control
Tucker said.
drones.
And basically, it was China saying, we're taking Taiwan. There's nothing you can do about it. So, well, we'll see. But,
Interesting.
all right. Kevin Hensley.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. State Representative in the 9th Representative District. And just going over your quick profile. You got it up, Rob, don't you?
Sure. Let me share this with our audience. They can see it. But
So you serve as the Appropriations.
Yep.
You're also on the Economic Development, Banking, Insurance, and Commerce, Education, Health and Human Development, Housing, Joint Finance, which obviously is very huge, and Veterans Affairs.
Yep. That's it.
All right, very good.
representing the, did you say the eighth?
9th.
Or ninth, sorry.
Ninth
Yep, ninth
in,
representative
in the
district.
Middletown, Townsend, Newcastle area.
Yeah.
Odessa.
Sort of,
Yep.
right?
Odessa.
So- and you have been there since 2014.
Yep.
Yep. What got you involved in politics?
So great question. So going way back to my college days at University of Delaware, I had been made aware of an opportunity to serve as an intern for Senator Bill Roth back in the day. And I was finishing up my undergrad and really didn't have just a couple classes to go, and started to intern in his Wilmington office. And it was a campaign year. He was up for re-election, and I was pulled aside one day and said, "Well, we've got an opportunity for you. I don't know if you're going to want it or not, but we're looking for a driver." So I literally spent 14 hours a day with the senator from May until November. And then following his reelection win, went to D.C., worked on Capitol Hill for a number of years doing legislative assistant work. And that really that's where I got the bug.
Right.
And so then eventually moved back to Delaware and was, basically starting and running a company and really sort of laid low in the political arena, if you will, or should I say even the community engagement arena. And then a friend of mine came to me back in the early 2000s and said, hey, we've got this great idea. We want to start a charter school in Middletown, and we'd like for you to be on the board. And of course, I got the typical, don't worry, it's not going to be a whole lot of time.
Right.
That kind of a thing. Of course not. And so I jumped on board, thought it was a neat idea for folks in the community to have a choice as to where they wanted to send their young ones to be educated. And spent 5 years on that board. And I remember going to the chairperson one day. Now, keep in mind, I didn't have any kids in the school at the time. I went to the chairperson at the time and I said, well, when's my term up? And she said, what are you talking about? And I said, well, I think you know what I'm talking about. And so I said, the reason I'm asking is my kids are in the traditional Apo school district, and I'd like to shift over there, take a shot at running for that board, just feeling like I could have a bit more, an impact on my kids and other schools, other people's kids' education. So served on that board. And and then re-entered the arena, I guess you could say. I got to thinking more about it 2012, 2013. We had a representative at the time, lovely lady, just didn't feel like there was a level of engagement that I thought folks in the 9th District wanted and deserved, and jumped in and ran in 2014, and it turned out to be an open seat, which frankly was kind of the Wild Wild West, and we prevailed and worked hard and earned it and kept it ever since.
Yeah. So you've been able to get reelected by you may feel it's a tight, but I would say fairly comfortable numbers in a Democratic district. How does that work?
Well, and the number's shrinking. But the district's changing. Mm-hmm. When I first ran in 2014, there were about 1,200 more registered Democrats than Republicans. Today, there's 4,300 more registered Democrats than Republicans, and that spread just continues to grow. So, quite frankly, I have found one of the keys, I guess you could say, to being successful and continuing to run is just the degree of engagement I have in the community. I'm out every day engaging with folks. A lot of folks will go door to door just before election time, and the constituents pick up on that. They'll say, "Oh, well, you're here. It must be an election year." When the weather breaks this spring, I'll be out knocking on doors, and it's a continuous cycle for me. I also do a monthly constituent coffee. I know Chris has joined me on occasion, and that's sort of taken on a life of its own in a good way. Started that. I've done over 100 of them over the course of my tenure in the General Assembly. Do them every month without fail. They started
down at the truck stop, right?
What's that?
Or were you doing
That's the Odessa Fire Hall now.
Fire Hall? Okay.
So I've outgrown 4 different places along the way. The last place I was kicked out of, tongue in cheek, was the Odessa Diner. Because he told me there was no room for his regulars.
Right.
And the last month we were there, I kind of sensed that the news was coming because literally it was packed and I was sitting on a kid's high chair. So I kind of realized it was probably time to go. So now we're at the Odessa Fire Hall. We live stream them, so we're getting anywhere in the neighborhood, depending on the month, 70 to maybe 100 people a month in person, several hundred people watching online. So it's the continuous engagement that people appreciate. Looking back at the numbers in the district from this past election cycle, again, as you indicated, we won by close to 6 points. Unfortunately, others did not fare so well. All of our statewide candidates on the Republican ticket lost by about 12 points across the board. President Trump lost by 15 points. So that crossover vote for me on the Democratic side and capturing a significant number of independents is absolutely crucial to success in my district.
Why do you think they vote for you?
I think they vote for me because they sense me as being someone that's engaged in the community. I think they also don't look at me as a radical right-wing individual. The number of people that will say to me, "You know what? I didn't even know your political party, until I looked you up online is telling.
That's the way it should be, though. I think you
Yeah.
should be
You should vote for the
there,
best person for
Vote
the
for the
job,
person, not the
not
best
based on a
person
letter.
for the job.
And
Yep.
it's interesting because some people will say from time to time when they look at my literature, they'll say, well, it doesn't say Republican or Democrat. And I said, well, that's purposely done because I want you to check me out and vote for me as an individual and my service to the community as opposed to just a label. And well, Chris knows. I mean, that's tough. I mean, it's tough to overcome. Particularly in presidential election years, I've had people say to me, you know what, Kevin, I voted for you before. I think you do a wonderful job in the community. This happened this past time. This happened 4 years ago. I just can't do it this time. And, as much as you're tempted to try to engage with them and just try to reiterate that, politics is local for the most part, and you really ought to be focused on that. Some people just can't see the forest through the trees, and you just keep it moving. But I think it's the service aspect of it really works out well come election time.
Yeah.
So, and it's not just you representing your constituents in the ninth, but it's also the influence you have at the state level, right?
Sure.
So that the representatives that get elected in the local districts have a huge impact on the state politics.
Well, true.
That you try to bring some of that back and help out your constituents, of course, locally, which
100%.
is important.
Right.
But the overall direction of the state is really controlled through these representative districts.
Absolutely correct, and you make a great point, Rob. Because basically, I've taken a look over the past week or so. We've gotten a handful of new members, and entering my 11th year, my seniority is pretty high because there's been a significant amount of turnover, and with that comes the ability, even though we're in the minority, to have a bit better opportunity to try to affect some change, like you said, not only for the 9th District, but for folks throughout the state.
So knowing that you have this, I'll say bipartisan support in your district, how does that impact how you legislate, how you behave in Dover?
Well, that's a great point. And basically, as you can imagine, certain issues, it can become challenging as it relates to, you're sent there to represent your district. That's first and foremost. So that's always top of mind. But there are issues where, my vote in my core may not effectively represent the district. And, clearly those votes are the votes that my opponents will cherry pick every 2 years and attempt to claim that, I no longer represent the district. I mean, you and I participated in a forum, I guess you could call it, during the last cycle, and that was really, frankly, the main theme, perhaps maybe the only theme, coming from my opponent. That I don't represent the district. I don't represent the district.
Do you have an example of one of those times where you had to vote when you knew it wasn't the best thing for your constituents, but maybe for the state as a whole?
I would probably go to one, first and foremost, would be legalization of marijuana. I mean, I heard from a lot of people in my district that supported it. I could not bring myself to support it.
A lot of interesting stuff coming out from the places that have
100%.
just mental illness.
A lot of
and,
problems.
increase.
Yeah, well, yeah.
A lot of
You say
problems.
things, I say problems. I mean,
Yeah,
you
a
look
lot
at
of
Colorado, you look at Maine. It's just, I ran to a law enforcement official actually from Maine here in Delaware. And, he just said, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. And started to rattle off a lot of the things that you read about. And unfortunately, I think that we were, I say, sold a bill of goods. I mean, the revenue impact, of course, is what was, particularly the lobbyists were quite effective. I mean, I will give credit because they tailored their pitch differently from caucus to caucus. And I know this just because I talked to, some of my friends over on the Democratic side. And when they came to Republicans, and they got no Republican votes, by the way, but, it was all about, the revenue. And again, you read articles from these other states, the reality has not even come close in articles that I've seen, to matching the projections. They did just, and then you take the potential society, impacts on society, the detrimental impacts, and what that's ultimately going to cost the taxpayers of our state, in whether it be increased, treatment and whatever the case might be, and of course that's not talked about by the advocates. They don't want to talk about that, but that's an example, Rob, of one where, and I caught a lot of heat for it. But you just kind of.
Well, I
Yeah, I
mean,
can-
go ahead. Sorry, Jim.
Well, I can tell you from personal experience. I would go to Pueblo, Colorado. I've been going there for work every year for probably about 10 or 12 years. And then Pueblo had been it's a small little town, but really beautiful, very safe, lots of nice restaurants. We, every evening we would go out with groups and go to different places to eat. And then over the past several years, which happened to correspond with the legalization of marijuana, the people out in the streets, the homelessness, the drugs everywhere, it's just, and the cops,
Sure.
It's just a mess. And you didn't feel safe anymore in Pueblo, Colorado. And so it's anecdotal,
Sure.
but it is my own personal experience, and it just so happened to time the legalization of marijuana. And obviously, as a retired police officer, I'm opposed to it.
Sure.
I don't think people need to go to jail for it, but I don't think you need it. It should not have been legalized.
Right.
So.
For the record, I'm not against it. Like, I'm more libertarian on this. Like, let people do whatever the heck they want.
Sure.
But I think we should still have ordinance in place at least. Don't walk around and have to smell it.
Yeah.
And it's
Right.
like cigarette smoking and anything else. It is quite tacky if you're trying to have a nice meal out and you've got to sit and smell it. Personally, my personal choice is I don't do that, but I don't
Right.
I don't think I know what's best for everybody. But I do understand that there is a societal impact on this, or
You're
as
not
as
allowed
well.
to smoke it while you're driving, and I can tell you that when I ride my Harley in the summertime,
Oh yeah.
there's not a time when you're not
You're not
driving
smelling it,
where you
yeah.
don't
That's right.
smell it, because people are smoking it in the car, which obviously is not a good. You can't drink alcohol while you're driving.
Correct.
You should not be able to smoke marijuana while you're driving. but they're doing it
100%.
all the time.
It impairs you.
It
100%.
absolutely does.
100%.
So
100%.
the party label issue wasn't necessarily going to go this way, but it is interesting. So, as the vice chair of the
You
Republican,
never know where this is going to go.
as the vice chair of the Republican Party, I obviously don't agree with that position. I understand the position,
Sure.
and the Democrats will not hesitate to say Democrat. Now, the voter registration numbers are very much in their favor.
Right.
I would contend the problem is that we have been labeled something that we really are not.
Agreed.
That is the issue, and so it's getting the word out. It's getting the opportunity.
Well, things like this podcast.
Exactly like this podcast. That we want people to see we are Republicans.
Sure.
We're not pushing a Republican agenda, but we are presenting a Republican point of view and having a discussion. But one of the things that I was really happy about is when Stephanie Hansen joined us.
Sure.
Because that was a great opportunity, because she had fun,
Good,
I mean, it was,
good.
she's walking in here and she was a little nervous, but I've known
I made
Stephanie-
sure to let her know I locked the door, but
yeah.
get out. This just so people
Shameless
don't walk
plug.
in.
It's episode
Shameless-
4.
Episode
Yes,
4.
episode 4.
But I have known her for years
Right.
and have always gotten along with her very well.
Yeah.
And it was a wonderful opportunity for her to present her point of view.
Sure.
She did. She had an open mic, and we would just ask some questions. That type of an exchange is really critical, where you're not just saying, well, I'm not going to listen to her because she's a Democrat.
Sure.
I'm not going to listen to him because we're Republican.
Right.
This is a person who is a Democrat elected representative who is presenting their point of view, and here's somebody presenting a counterpoint of view.
Sure.
And let me think about what that is, and I can make a decision. And that's really, which is also the reason why she was willing to come on, because she felt like we need to have a better opportunity to have dialogue.
Agreed.
And
And that's one thing too, Jim, that is desperately lacking in Dover. The days of healthy, fruitful debate,
yeah.
I've not seen in quite some time.
So that's an interesting topic, and I know, because I've been around for a while, and I know these changes have occurred. It used to be that you would have opposing points of view, but you would have that
Sure.
dialogue, and then at the end of the day, you would all get together and break bread or have a social drink, and then
Sure.
and then talk as friends. You just had different points of view on things.
Correct.
But you had a greater opportunity to come together.
Correct.
It seems like that is not the case anymore. Can you go into that?
Absolutely, it's not at all. And quite frankly, I would characterize what you just described, Jim, as the Delaware way. And the Delaware way is no longer the way, and it's unfortunate. And quite frankly, I mentioned earlier about the change in dynamic, i.e., a whole different group of members, if you will, that have come in over the course of my tenure in the General Assembly. And frankly, they've come in a lot of younger folks, which in some respects is great. They bring energy, they bring different ideas, and so forth and so on. However, on the flip side of that, they come in. Oftentimes, they tend to be what I would consider to call single issue candidates. They come in, perhaps they've got an axe to grind about something, and they've focused on it, and there's no dialogue. And unfortunately, oftentimes, they've got the votes. I mean, there's no secret to this, and things just sort of get rammed through. And I mean, I'll give a perfect example. I mean, we had a couple bills, gun bills, where the constitutionality question was asked, and the comment was made, well, we're just going to pass them now, and we'll worry about that issue later when it goes to the courts.
Right.
I mean, that's frustrating,
It
and
is.
it's not an appropriate way to handle. But yeah, so even in committees, there's opposing sides that are presented, but at the end of the day, when we get to the floor, we're only in session, 40 days a year, give or take. And, agendas are full and people want to have other things that they want to do. But like you said, the days of, because I remember that those days were the days when I started,
Yeah.
where, there'd be some debate, but it was cordial and it was respectful. And that's a big difference, because we're not seeing that today. It's almost like you've got that point of view, shame on you.
Right.
And it's not healthy for the constituents of our state. It's not healthy for our state. And, we could talk about one-party rule, which I struggle with. I think we've got real issues with one-party rule. We're one vote away from a supermajority in the House.
Can you explain what that means to?
Oh, sure. Okay, of course. So basically, thanks, Rob. So basically, one-party rule means that one party has the state House, state Senate, and the governor's office.
Yeah, and what does that mean? What is that?
Yeah, so basically what that means ultimately is that as a member of the Republican caucus, the Republican Party, with all due respect, really doesn't have the ability to slow things down, to basically force worthwhile dialogue. I mean, it can just be, pushed through, no questions asked. And it really, in some cases, has stymied the ability of us to have dialogue. I mean, there have been two instances that I remember in my 10 years tenure where, and this is embarrassing to admit, now there are 14 of us in the House, but there have been 15 and as many as 16 while I've been there. We've all gotten up and walked out.
What does that do if you guys present a bill and you want to pass a law in the state of Delaware? How would that, or how does that go?
So basically, the way that it goes is that first thing I do is to find a champion on the other side of the aisle.
Because
I know darn well if it's a solely Republican bill, then it has very little to no chance of going anywhere.
of being brought to the floor to be voted on, right?
And maybe not even brought to committee.
Right.
Now,
Okay.
it depends on the committee chairs. And as a member, my relationship with those individuals, which fortunately for me is very good. But, it's sort of an unwritten understanding, I guess, that as a Republican, you could have 5 or 6 of the best ideas known to man. You're going to get one bill a year. That's it. So there have been instances, not me personally, but there have been instances where colleagues in my caucus have given a bill to a Democrat across the aisle to sponsor and run with because they know that there's a better chance of it coming to fruition in the end than if that Republican's name Republican member's name is at the top of the bill.
It'd be nice to know who those people were. That's pure altruism. They know they're not getting any political clout for this.
Yep.
And yet they're willing to, for their constituents, say, "I know this is good for the people. I know I'm not going to get anything out of this.
Yep.
Can you please take this
Well,
and run with it?"
and I'll tell you a perfect example of a passion of mine, and we may get into this. I'm going to apologize if I'm jumping the gun here.
Oh, you're good.
But, I'm a huge school safety and security guy. I've sponsored 2 pieces of legislation, one to create a school safety and security fund, one to add additional items that would qualify for districts to use the monies for. And again, first thing I thought about is, okay, who am I going to get? And ideally for me, it was a Democratic senator. Okay. I went to Senator Hansen. Okay.
Right.
And reasonable lady. And we share some of the same geographic area. We have unfortunately had to share 2 instances of guns within the Appoquinimink School District, and so that was my first thought. I had a bill last year, a health-related issue, and I went to a Democratic senator and got her on board. And so you have to be strategic and been picking who you want to go with. I mean, I'll give you a perfect example of when there wasn't a strategy, only not because the sponsor didn't want one, but couldn't get anybody else on board, was when we as a caucus were trying to slow down the EV mandate. And I know you guys have probably talked about the EV mandate on here before.
We have.
So we introduced legislation. Former Representative Ramon introduced legislation. All of us, everybody on the caucus went on the bill. Could not get a single Democrat to go on because they probably sensed that they could get pushback from the administration. And again, this goes back to single party rule, guys. And
this EV mandate. Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, like, we talk a lot about party, right? And we want to make sure that we're preaching or speaking to our broad audience here.
100%.
Yeah. So I'm trying to figure out how to summarize that for some of these folks, where it's like, it's not just that the Republicans are bringing it up and the Democrats aren't saying it. It's that there are good ideas being brought to the table, and simply because of a letter after the name, they're not even being brought up for discussion to potentially make Delaware even better than it is today.
Perfectly put, Chris. Perfectly put. Yep, you're spot on correct.
And the problem with that is that you can have a dictatorship by majority. And essentially, if you get a majority, which is 50% plus 1,
Correct.
that majority can basically do anything they want.
Correct.
That happens.
Correct.
This is a clear example of that.
Yep.
This is the antithesis of what our founding fathers created, because they did not want to create this system.
Correct.
They purposely created a bicameral system of government to split the power.
Correct.
So that it would force you to actually work together.
Right.
And we are not a democracy, because in democracies you can have a dictatorship by majority.
Sure.
We are a republic.
Right.
And the problem is that Delaware is no longer a republic, because when you have a one-party rule that rules with, I would say, an iron fist that prevents the opposing party from having an opportunity to bring up ideas,
Right.
you essentially do have, my terminology, a dictatorship by majority. And the Delaware residents do not receive the benefit from that. And I'm going to tell you right now, I'm a Republican. We don't have all the best ideas.
We do not. We do not.
But together,
Right.
from different points of view, when we come together, which is the way it used to be,
Right.
we can come up with a solution that benefits both sides. I don't always get what I want, and they don't always get what they want, but together we come up with a good top, and we don't have that now.
We don't, and that's frankly, Jim, where we've lost that thread is in some cases, depending on the issue, the lack of congeniality amongst members, and there's not that dialogue, and then there's not an idea and understanding that compromise is what it's all about. Unfortunately, in many cases, it's my way or the highway, and we get rolled in the process.
So now I will tell you from some conversations that I've had with some Democrats, and I have less and less of them that are friends just because of this dynamic that's occurring. But there had been a number over the years, and I go back to John Viola.
Oh yeah,
I mean, great guy. Mitchell in Ellesmere.
Oh, yeah, Larry Mitchell,
Larry
great guy.
Mitchell, retired from the county police.
Yep.
And so you had this great interaction, but I have had a number of Democrats have told me that the problem they see this, is that there is a radical group that comes in the
Sure.
primary and wins the primary because they know they don't have any challenge in the general election.
Yep.
So I would say if there's anything of concern about some radical points of view, it really isn't the Republican side. It's really in the Democratic side, and even Democratic members of the General Assembly in private are concerned about how some of this is
Oh,
going.
there's no doubt. I mean, I've had conversations with some of my colleagues on that side of the aisle that express the same concerns, Jim.
Yeah.
You know, they know that it's not healthy for not only, the group of constituents, but for Delawareans as a whole.
And so thus you mentioned this, the critical component is getting information out.
Sure.
And having knocked on doors,
Yep.
you do it, and you did it, and I've done it, and I've done it with you. The voters don't really have a good understanding about what is going on,
They don't.
and there's very limited opportunities for them to actually get that information.
Correct.
I would also contend that this government, the way this has been structured, and especially after COVID, this is not a very transparent government.
It's not. It's not. And quite frankly, you hit on a good point because oftentimes, and again, on doors, and I mean, I'm sure you would agree, Chris would agree, that folks are frankly oftentimes oblivious to what's going on. And you try to engage with them and have conversations. And quite frankly, a lot of them, I mean, they're just in their own little world.
Mm-hmm.
They get up in the morning, they go to work, they come home, they take their kids to their activities, they fix supper, they go to bed,
Right.
and they just repeat the cycle the next day.
Yeah.
It's not until something adversely impacts their personal life that they wake up and go, oh my gosh, I mean, I didn't realize it was this way, or why don't we think about making it that way?
Right.
But you can talk to them till you're blue in the face at the door. If they've not personally felt that,
Mm-hmm.
then it oftentimes it's like talking to a wall, and it's very frustrating.
It is.
It's very, very frustrating.
So in that vein of what can we do to help people know what's going on?
Sure.
Kevin, what the heck's going on?
Well, it's a great question. But again, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, getting the word out and things like these podcasts, and with not with the variety of guests that you've had, and I'm confident will continue to have, is a step in the right direction. From my perspective, I think that the monthly coffees again is an opportunity to get people engaged, and because I mean literally, it's interesting because I do my best to try to give them a report what's going on in the district, what's going on in Dover when appropriate, when we're in session, and then open it up to them.
Right.
And the interesting part is, and I know I'm a bit of an anomaly because I was having the conversation with a fellow elected official. I'm not going to say who, but I was explaining the whole coffee concept, and he looked at me and he looks at me, and honest to gosh, he goes, "Why in the heck would you want to do that? You don't know what these people are going to say. Right. You don't know what they're going to ask you. Do you have this thing like on delay or what?" No, this is all like we're going with it.
Right.
And it's interesting because you look at all 62 members of the House of the General Assembly. I would say there might be 8 or 10 of us that do coffees. Period.
Right.
And I think that again, the constituents need to know what's going on. So I think that from a grassroots perspective, I would love nothing more than for somebody in another part of the state, let's say, to catch wind of this, go to their legislator and say, "Why aren't you doing this?"
Right.
I feel in the dark. I didn't realize that this was even part of a legislator's job. I mean, because I bet you ask a lot of people out there, they don't even know.
Right.
And so, I mean, it's just, just continuing to, and I mean, I noticed, it's interesting because when I first started doing the coffees, I did an evening one, and then I had people complaining. I had one during the day. Then I had people complaining that I wasn't doing evening one. So I started doing evening one. And what ended up happening was literally 3/4 of the people that were showing up for the evening one were also at the morning one the week before. And I'm thinking, well, at least you must have been desperate to get out of the house because have you not yet figured out? I'm talking about the same stuff. So, but the point of the matter being is I kept chewing on it, thinking about it, and I thought, okay, Facebook Live. Let's give that a shot.
Right.
And it's interesting because, it's not uncommon now, 400 people watching online in addition to the people. So it's just a matter of just exposure and getting out there.
And I'll put a link on this video,
Good.
so people watching just click down below.
Appreciate it.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
there'll
No,
be a
thank you,
link
Rob.
We're not on Facebook. We ought to be on Facebook.
We can share them anywhere we want
Yeah,
to.
we should.
There you go.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
Good idea. Thanks.
No problem.
Yeah, and Senator Hansen, she has tried to do outreach, and she likes to do these town halls.
Correct.
And then she actually asked me if I would come to represent the Republican point of view,
Outstanding.
which was fantastic.
Outstanding.
I couldn't do it. Chris went in my place.
Good.
Our far better choice. But there was
Tough shoes to fill, Jim.
15 people. I mean, there was
Yeah.
like hardly anybody who showed up. So I suggested that maybe the podcast could be a way of doing
Right.
this. And
Well,
any member of the General Assembly, Republican or Democrat, that wants to have a voice that we can talk about issues, we're
yeah.
open.
Well, and I do think too, just to touch on that, Jim, I do think that one of the keys is consistency.
Mm-hmm.
People know, come heck or high water,
Yeah.
every single month we're doing it.
You're doing it.
Second
right.
Tuesday of the month. They know when. They know time and place. And I think that's. I mean, there's some one colleague in particular. I know he just does them while the General Assembly is in session.
Right.
So he's just doing them sporadically from January to June.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm frankly not sure the kind of attendance he gets, but I think that's a big part of it.
Right.
And it takes a lot of work.
Yeah.
I mean, it takes a lot
does,
of work, and
it does.
I'll mix it in with guest speakers. And just we had one just last week from Easter Seals talking about their assistive technologies and so forth and so on, and resources they had for caregivers, and people loved it.
Yeah.
And so I don't do it every month, but maybe once a quarter or so, give or take, I'll bring in a guest, and I've had a ton of variety. I mean, a ton of variety of folks come in, and it works well.
All right, great. So what are some of the challenges that we're facing in the state of Delaware that the General Assembly is going to be tackling? With?
Okay, a couple, Jim. So basically, I mean, first and foremost, I'll touch on the budget. As a member of the budget writing committee, we're getting ready to get started on that process. And during my tenure on the committee, I guess I'm going into my 5th year. The revenue piece. Well, let me take it from a different perspective. The growth in the budget, just in my tenure, has just been absolutely, positively unsustainable and off the charts.
So spending.
Spending. Thank you, Rob. However, our revenues have kept up with that. That's not going to continue for in perpetuity.
Why not?
Well, because quite frankly, our revenues, or our budget, is built off of some of the most unpredictable revenues out there. And let me give a couple of examples, if I may. First and foremost, obviously, corporate income tax is huge for us, absolutely huge. And you know what? Corporations could choose to pull out and go to another state.
Which they are.
I know they are
doing that now.
And depending on, and I'm hoping and praying that we don't upset the apple cart with Court of Chancery, which is a large part of why many of them are here. So, that's a problem.
But it's also a reason why they're starting to leave.
That is correct.
Okay.
Second most unpredictable source of income is casino revenue. Back in the day when we were the only game in town, we reaped a lot of benefits from casino winnings revenue through taxes. Now we're not the only game in town. All of us know that. And so the busloads of people that came in from Pennsylvania and Maryland are going to the casino in Chester and the casino right outside of Havre de Grace, Maryland. So we've seen those revenues drop down over time. The other area that we tend to do very well in is a sheet, which is basically unclaimed property. So what we're basically doing is counting on people not to cash in their MoneyGrams or not to, realize that their old bank accounts that they may have inherited over time and so forth and so on. Well, the problem we have there is, I mentioned MoneyGram. We used to, since MoneyGram is domiciled in Delaware, we used to, at some point, reap the benefit of all of the uncashed MoneyGrams across the country.
Right.
Well, one day, about 25 states woke up. So wait a minute. If that MoneyGram was originated in West Virginia, then we, West Virginia, ought to be able to capture that revenue at some point in time. Of course, we in Delaware felt differently. Well, it went all the way up the chain of went to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court rules, of course, for these 20 some odd states and against Delaware. We were getting at one time $32 million, gentlemen, in just MoneyGram unclaimed revenue yearly.
Do people still send money with MoneyGrams? Like how?
Yes, they do.
Somebody does.
I guess. I mean,
Well, yeah,
PayPal,
people
Cash
pay. Yeah,
App.
I mean, I know people. Yeah, I'm familiar with people paying rent with them, and 100%. Even with Venmo, Cash App, Zelle, yeah, absolutely. So anyway, so then to complete the circle, Jim, on a very good question. So the unpredictability of our revenue is a problem. The fact that the largest employer in the state of Delaware is the state of Delaware, that's a whole other problem.
It is a problem, huge problem.
But Kevin, if the revenue goes down, we'll just reduce spending,
You
right?
think?
Isn't that?
Well, we would be forced to reduce spending, Rob, only because the one thing that we're constitutionally, thank gosh, bound to do every year is to pass a balanced budget. My frustration as revenues have been climbing along, it's spending, we're right there alongside of it, is that, yes, we've been putting some money away for a rainy day. We basically have 2 rainy day funds for all intents and purposes. In my opinion, we've not put nearly the degree of resources, the amount of money that we should be doing to do that. And
To cover that gap.
that is correct. We know is coming
So you said we're constitutionally bound to that.
to a balanced budget, correct.
What's it take to change the Constitution in the state of Delaware? No, this is all tying back, right?
Yeah, well, if I may, before that,
Sure.
you said a couple minutes ago that there were people passing laws, elected officials, and stating, "Hey, this isn't in alignment with the Constitution."
That is correct.
We're not worried about that.
Yeah,
Did I hear that right?
You're not.
Did our listeners hear that?
100%.
Right?
Yeah,
it was an
We're
oath or
passing a
something.
law. We respect the fact that you're questioning the constitutionality. We're just going to go ahead and pass it and let the courts make the determination. Yep.
So when it comes to something like a balanced budget,
Yep.
I'll say the question this way, and
Sure.
hope it doesn't put you on the spot too much. But how come we actually obey the Constitution there, and
Well-
we don't in other places?
Well, because basically, those folks that have voted for things, let me make it a little simpler for folks that are listening. It takes a 2/3 vote to change the Constitution, and this is going to sound partisan, but it's just the way things are. The Democrats are 1 vote away from having a supermajority in the House. They already have it in the Senate to change the Constitution. So theoretically, the Constitution could be changed to say we don't need it. Don't worry about a balanced budget. Could theoretically happen. Theoretically happen, and thank gosh it hasn't.
And part of the problem is that there is a economic philosophy that you don't need to worry about deficits. That spending will stimulate, and it doesn't matter how much of a debt you have because basically the debt has no impact.
What is that?
That is a
Yeah, no, you're right.
I was
The
watching
United
something the other
States is
day.
operating that way.
Very much so.
Farmers used to believe that if you plowed the land, you would let the moisture out of the soil, and that would bring the rain. I forget what show I was watching, but if you plow the land, the rain will come because you're letting the water out. And I think it's the same thing with this idea of
Sure.
spend the money,
Yep.
we'll find a way to pay for it.
Well, and speaking of spending the money, if I may sort of shift gears for a second. So we're talking about now this is an interesting dynamic of time that we're in at the moment. So basically, next week, a new governor will be sworn in. One of the first acts of the governor every year is to present his or her, we call it GRB, Governor's Recommended Budget. Because the governor will have been governor for about maybe a week or 10 days, he will actually be presenting former Governor Carney's
right.
recommended budget. So it would be interesting to see the nuances of how that all plays out, because Governor-elect Meyer has made it very clear, and I want to touch on this because it ties back to the budget. A huge focus, emphasis on education. He's a former teacher. I totally understand. Here's the problem: we have been beating around this education question for probably long before I ever earned the opportunity to serve in the General Assembly. of what will probably be about a $7 billion with a B billion dollar budget this next fiscal year. Well north of $1 billion will be for public education. So we're literally in the top 5, 6,
We are. We're in
Roughly.
the top
Yep.
5
in
for spending
per capita.
per capita, and the lower 5 in results.
Correct.
And so, what does that tell what I would like to think reasonably thinking people? Throwing money at the problem ain't fixing the problem. And so, it'll be interesting to see if Governor Meyer has a different approach because, like I said, we've just been continuing to throw money, particularly in our high need schools. And we're not seeing the results. We're just not seeing the results.
No, we're not. It's actually getting worse.
We can do a whole series on that.
Yeah,
We are.
yeah, you
And
could.
we are going to have.
That's a great idea. We
Yeah.
should do that.
I think
we
it
are-
was your idea, actually, Chris.
We're going to have Tanya Hetler in.
Good.
At, because she's,
Yep, she
I would
does.
consider her an expert.
100%.
She's
Yeah,
around the
she's
industry. Yes.
much more well versed
Yeah.
than I am. on
So
that.
that'll be in February.
Good.
Yeah, what's interesting is if I can maybe correct your numbers there. In our current budget, we're at 2.1 billion.
Are we
for
that high?
education. And I've heard Governor-elect Meyer talk about adding another half to 1 billion to that.
Right.
Which, if the budget, by the way, everybody, our current budget's 6.1. They're talking about 7 billion for next year.
Yeah.
So that could potentially be all that increase is simply education, or it means that other programs get cut to support education, or it means that 7 billion number gets thrown out the window and we're north of that.
Which is frustrating because, quite frankly, one of my big pet peeves while we're still on the budget is, the budget's basically, I always describe it as a three-legged stool. You've got the general operating budget, you've got the grant and aid budget, which funds hundreds of nonprofits around the state that do incredible work. And then you've got the bond bill, which is basically supposed to be infrastructure projects related roads and things of that nature. And so, unfortunately, what tends to happen over time is that, that grant and aid piece, oftentimes, if a belt needs to get tightened, they get the short end of the stick, which is truly problematic to me because, again, these groups are doing incredible work throughout the community. I mean, quite frankly, in many cases, helping the most vulnerable populations. And goodness forbid, if they don't have the money to operate, who's going to provide these services? My worst nightmare is that the state ends up having to provide these services. They don't provide it nearly as effectively, and probably it costs us taxpayers triple the cost that we're paying the nonprofit entities now. So, a lot of people in the General Assembly don't want to cut the bond bill, and I'm just going to say it. They don't want to cut the bond bill because ultimately those are all the projects that get funded
I would
in their
say,
district.
I would say favors.
Favors is a very appropriate term, Jim.
Thank you.
Yes, 100%. And then we'll close the circle. And you tend to see it more in election years.
Right.
If anybody wants some good nighttime reading, the bond bill came out this morning.
Yes, it did.
There we are.
Yes,
Thank
it
you.
It's a quick 82 pages.
Yes, it is.
So we know what Chris is going to be doing tonight. So congratulations, Chris.
Thank you.
Chat GPT summarized this for me.
I'll say I have two more questions on the budget, and we move on to a
Good.
couple other things. Is there a concern that about a third of the people in the state of Delaware either work for or reliant upon the government? And how does that impact the state budget?
In a huge way. In a huge way. I mean, again, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, we've got, last I checked, 300 and some odd thousand on Medicaid.
Right.
There's clearly a federal component, a funding component of that. But there's clearly a state component as well. So that costs us, and we refer to, say, Medicaid as a quote unquote door opener. And so what does that mean to laymen? Basically, that's implies that it's a set cost. We as a state can't do anything to address it. It kind of is what it is. I look at it from a little different perspective. I question, what are we doing from an auditing perspective? I mean, are we just making an assumption that, well, all these people have been on it, so they should continue to be on it, and we're continuing to add, of course? Or are we really taking a deep dive? And I've asked this question, by the way, Department of Health and Social Services. And the answer I get probably won't shock any of you gentlemen here. Oh, we don't have the resources to deal with that.
It's actually even worse than that. They want to increase the amount of people receiving benefits as high as they can because it increases their budget.
That's correct.
That's the problem with the bureaucracy around that.
100%. I mean, and,
So it's intentional.
oh, it is. 100%. And couple that with, and it's a little, I'm moving off for a second, Jim. I'm going to go right back on. That coupled with the fact, as I mentioned earlier, state of Delaware being the largest employer, and what does a state employee get? A very generous health care package that we as citizens are paying for. I mean, the employee might be paying in the neighborhood, and these are Cadillac plans, by the way. The employee themselves, the contribution may be 10% of the overall cost of that policy. Who's paying the 90? We are as taxpayers.
So the final question is, okay, so we might have some problems with the budget, and it might not be balanced, but what's it matter to me?
Well, that's a great. So here's how it matters to you. Let's say, for the sake of conversation, I'm trying to come up with a concrete example. But let's say that Route 40 in Bear needs to be resurfaced. You got potholes everywhere and total disrepair and so forth and so on. For those who happen to live in that area, they start calling their legislator, hey, this road's atrocious. Some may say, listen, I bent my axle on my car because I ran into a pothole. And that constituent, the response may be from the lawmaker, well, sorry, we don't have the money to deal with repaving that road. There's a case in point of something that would be a problem. In my area, in Middletown, the growth is continuing at a rapid pace. Mm-hmm. In order to keep up with that growth, a lot of young families coming down with kids. Mm-hmm. So what if we were to have to say to a young family with kids, oh, sorry, I realize that your kid is going to have 40 plus kids in their classroom because we don't have the money necessary to either expand on a school, build a new school, to create additional classrooms. So it's those real life types of examples that none of us want to have to get to, for people to realize the importance of having the resources necessary to provide services.
So essentially what could happen is that services would have to be impacted because you just don't have the money to pay for it.
You got it.
And I think not just, sorry.
Or you have to pay more for those services.
Right. And of course, as you can imagine, that doesn't sit well with a lot of people, but that's an option.
So I think in California, for instance, which I would say that Delaware is now the California of the East Coast. In California. Yeah. When the mayor decides to reduce the fire department budget by $17 million, there might be a consequence for that.
Yes, there might.
Okay. I was going to say the opportunity cost of having that that deficit spending or that high tax rate to cover this massive spending bill that we have.
When there's 100 pieces of fire equipment that is sitting that can't be operated because she didn't have the money, the police chief or the fire chief didn't have the money to repair it, there's a consequence for that.
Right. Or when nobody's confirming that there's no water in the fire hydrant.
And I having spent some time as a volunteer firefighter, you do need water. Yeah.
It's the opportunity cost that those policies generate. So how many people are trying to move to California right now?
Yeah.
Like zero, right? There's a U-Haul deficit.
Correct.
So people are leaving the state. So that that unmeasurable cost, or I mean it's measurable, but of companies not wanting to do business in a state that has really high tax rates or a large tax burden, people not wanting to live there or live in state and not be part of those communities.
Sure.
So you're not attracting the top talent, the big businesses that bring the good, high-paying jobs.
Sure.
So then you wind up with a third of your population on Medicare and very low-income jobs and really a lower quality of life.
And that is a state that is blessed with some of the greatest natural resources.
Oh my gosh,
greatest beauty and
stunning.
And so many assets, and an amazing farming area that has unwisely spent their money.
Yep.
It's extremely expensive to live there.
Oh, yeah.
When my godson moved to San Diego, in order to rent his place, he had to put down a year's worth of deposit.
Wow.
He had to pay an
Ouch.
entire year as a deposit,
Ouch.
and then of course pay the rent, which was like $3,000, $4,000.
For-
I think it was even more than that. So yeah, I mean, so that's what happens when a state unwisely spends their money.
Yep. 100%.
Okay.
So
Not their money.
could we
Well, no. Taxpayers' money.
could we explore the two sides of that really quick here in Delaware, right?
Sure.
So if we start spending more than we bring in revenue, what do you think's, in your opinion, what do you think's going to get cut first at the state level?
Well, and I'm going to answer that in a sec, Chris, but I think one thing that's important for people to keep in mind is that if we were to find ourselves in that sort of a predicament, our bond rating would drop through the floor. Now, what does that mean to folks listening? Basically, when we borrow money as a state to fund, large road projects and things of that nature, we don't just stroke a check for the whole thing. I mean, we go out to the bond market and we basically borrow money, and we now have a AAA rating.
Mm-hmm.
So clearly, we're able to have pretty much
Doesn't get any better than that.
doesn't get any better than that. But yeah, I mean, it would make it very, very, very challenging to
Fund projects.
fund projects.
That would be like the vicious cycle, actually, right? The bond rating goes down, our interest rates are going to go up.
Yep.
It's going to become even more expensive.
Agreed.
Right? We're going to be spending more money to do the same thing.
And I think ultimately, it's interesting because I'm going to throw in a little bit of a twist here. You had asked what would be cut. I happen to think that most likely there would be counterparts that in Dover that would try to raise taxes before they cut anything.
Yep.
Oh, I was going to explore the other side of that,
I
which
mean,
is
I remember we had a situation. Oh my gosh, this is probably going back 7 or 8 years ago, where it was June 29th. Keep in mind, June 30th, we're done for the year. So our backs are against the wall, and we're told that we have about a $300 million deficit. And what are we going to do? And of course, most of us, in my caucus, said, okay, well, let's sharpen the pencil and figure out what we're going to cut. I mean, the budget wasn't clearly what it is today, but you could find $300 million worth of cuts, right? Oh no. So instead, what ended up happening was, we were all asked of three items. Yeah, what could we tax increases? What could we support? One of them was raising the real estate transfer tax from 3% to 4%. We'd already were the highest in the nation. Now we're more than the highest in the nation. Yep. And then, of course, they go after the sin taxes, alcohol and tobacco. That's how they made up that gap. With us not, you talk about the inability to really, have a seat at the table where the decisions are really made, as opposed to us screaming, well, why don't we do half and half? I mean, we figured,
Right.
half loaf's better than no loaf. Half cuts,
Right.
half taxes. And nope, absolutely not. Raised $300 million in a night, basically, and we went about our merry way.
right. And so if we bring that back to the conversation or the comments you made earlier, right, our revenue sources are pretty variable. We can't control how much tax companies are going to pay into Delaware.
Correct.
Right. So even if you change the interest rate, or the tax rate, they might choose to go elsewhere.
Correct.
And we don't go from whatever, I'm not sure the interest, everything.
I forget
keep saying interest, tax rate.
Tax rate, yeah.
Yeah, we don't go from 6 to 7%. We might go from 6 to 0.
Well, and to piggyback on what you said, Jim, they're already starting to go.
Mm-hmm. They are.
And so, but as you can imagine, with something to that effect, we would see, gosh forbid, see more of a mass exodus.
Yeah.
And then talk about pressure on the budget. Oh my gosh! I mean, it would.
So then, where would those taxes most likely be raised?
That's a great question.
Right.
I don't know the answer to, and it's scary that I don't know the answer. I mean, we have no plan B.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the scary reality here. I mean, we just continue to plod along and plod along and plod along. And I mean, I've said for the last 3 years, this shoe's going to drop, and we need to be prepared for it.
Yeah.
Fiscal cliff.
Fiscal cliff, Rob. Absolutely.
By the way, there's a Twitter account that I think they had about 25,000 followers leave Delaware.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've
so-
read some stuff from them.
Well, in a few more minutes left, because we would love to have you come back, but I don't want to monopolize all your time.
Sure.
A couple more, quick bullet items on some issues of concern.
Okay, so from a legislative standpoint, okay, so last year there was a bill introduced that would allow a minor child to have a conversation with a medical professional and go as far as to explore and go through with gender changing processes, if you will, without parental involvement in any way, shape, or form.
Correct.
So this is taking hormones or drugs as well as surgical
You
procedures.
got it, Rob. Full 9 yards. And we're all parents here. I'm sure there are a lot of parents going to be listening. I mean, I was appalled. I'm thinking as a parent. So to take it even a step further. So basically, your minor child can choose to go through this process. You as the parent are not engaged in the process. You don't even know the process is going on. Okay. Yet at the end of the day, if it moves forward to completion, your insurance paid for it.
Right. You have no choice in that matter. And
You were on the hook.
empowering the child to make that decision. If they choose that, then maybe we should lower the drinking age to 6.
Sure.
Maybe you can
Yeah.
sign up for the military when you're 6.
Yep.
I mean, maybe we can have them make these other commitments.
Sure.
Since apparently it's 6 or 5, you have the capability of actually changing your sex.
Yeah. 100%.
Contract obligations, criminal proceedings.
Yeah, I think all of it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if your 6-year-old wants to buy a house,
Yeah. Let them buy a house.
let them buy a house.
Yeah.
Open a credit card.
Sure.
why not?
Sure. Why not? They'll pay it back.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's a concern.
That's a
so
big
that was introduced.
Yep.
Now, is this a new General Assembly? So
It's
it
a
has to be-
new General Assembly.
has
So
to be
basically,
reintroduced.
has to be reintroduced. We've only gone through day 2, so I've not yet heard if it's the intent of the sponsor to reintroduce it. As a matter of fact, I don't even think it made it out of committee last year. But you got to keep in mind we've got 6 new members.
Right.
Hard to know where
Yeah.
these individuals may be on this issue, but
Exactly.
fundamentally, to me, anybody in general, but oh my gosh, anybody who's a parent, I don't care what political side of the aisle you're on, I have a hard time grasping how anybody could see that this is a good idea.
Yeah.
And all these bills are public. I'll post a link
100%,
below. Yep.
100%.
To
But
this one in
when
particular.
that is introduced, it would be good for us to be aware of.
Yeah,
it.
and I'll send you guys a copy for sure.
All right. What else are you worried about?
Well, again, the budget clearly is a big piece. Again, that bill in particular, nothing else is coming.
Second Amendment issues.
Oh, absolutely. Always. Those are, and again, because I look at the dynamic and the change of thought processes of members, in my tenure there. And there's always going to be, pardon the pun, there's always going to be an assault on it. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And frankly, the example that I mentioned earlier about, I may violate the Constitution, but we'll let the court. Again, I think I did mention it was gun-related bills. So no, I see those continue to come up, and it's frustrating because I've attempted to have dialogue with folks as a big Second Amendment guy myself, with folks on the other side, and I'm like, well, I've never known a gun to kill anybody.
They do not. Actually.
Okay, just making sure.
I'm a retired police officer.
Okay, just making sure I didn't miss something along the way. I didn't miss the memo. We could talk about mental health and things of that nature, but so it's going to continue to be an issue, Jim. No doubt
Well,
about it.
you did mention earlier that there was some shootings at the schools
Correct.
in Middletown. So more laws will prevent that, though.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
How about charter schools have always been a target. Are charter schools safe?
I think those that are in existence, unless there's something that really happens that jeopardizes. I know a number of them just came up for their 5 or 10 year review through DOE.
Yeah.
It's my understanding they all got their charters extended. There will be those naysayers that will say, continue to say in the General Assembly, well, they capture the cream of the crop kids,
Right.
so that the traditional school districts are stuck with those that may not be cream. You know, they're folks that.
What does that even mean? That
Yeah,
even
well,
cream of the crop kids.
well, and here's the issue, Rob. You know, I'll go back to my old MOT charter days. Okay, the selection process was done by a blind lottery, and I do mean a blind lottery. Every kid had a number. I couldn't tell you who these kids were or who they weren't, or what their grades were, or some of them had IEPs, whatever the case might be. We didn't know. I mean, it was but again,
Well, what that means is that the fickle finger of fate just happened to have all of the brightest students go to charter schools, and the type of education provided had nothing to do with it.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
well, and the other criticism when we're moving away from the cream of the crop kids is there's certain charter school, one in particular. I mean, it's no secret, Newark Charter, who has a 5-mile radius.
Yeah.
If you're not living within that 5-mile radius, you can't apply.
Can't
And I mean, and there was a former representative from that area that just used to get up on the floor and hoot and holler and scream and carry on. And the fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, it was in their charter that Department of Education approved.
Right.
It's not something they arbitrarily woke up one morning and said, "Yeah, we think we want a 5-mile radius. That sounds like a good idea." I mean, it was in the charter from the get-go.
Yeah.
So, will there continue to be assaults? Yeah, there probably will.
Okay. School choice would certainly not be anything. I mean, that's a growing trend across the country. That
Correct.
would not be.
I don't see it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I don't see it.
I was gonna,
Delaware.
I was just going to say about education more broadly, right? You talked about it as a big issue. Everybody at home probably talks about it with their friends.
Sure.
You seeing anything, any new legislation come up to improve our education? I mean, we talked about the money side of it,
Right.
but what about
Yeah,
actual support?
Yeah,
I know we're going to spend some time on that one later on, but
But yeah, like what
Yeah.
are you seeing from a legislation?
I'm seeing nothing. I'm seeing
Okay.
nothing, Chris. So yeah, I'll be anxious to see, and then
Okay.
that would probably be something. Give us a little bit of time. I mean, I'm going to introduce legislation that basically continues to expand on the school safety and security.
Sure.
And I will tell you, interesting, and I don't want to belabor this point, and I know we're probably tight on time. When I introduced my first bill for this, establishing the fund and so forth and so on, and listing the items that were eligible for the funding, okay, because I just wanted there to be some accountability so that a district didn't choose to use the funding for a new artificial turf football field. I mean, that may sound a little extreme, but I just wanted to make sure that we were clear. Kind of sailed through, and then sailed through the General Assembly. Very little conversation. Second bill, I added constables as one of the items that districts could use this funding for, and all of a sudden the pushback started. I thought, why? I mean, we hear about all these horrific events around the country and so forth and so on. There are some individuals in the General Assembly that don't feel that there should be a quote-unquote law enforcement kind of person in a school, that it disrupts the learning environment.
Violence disrupts the learning.
It does, doesn't it?
tremendously.
Yeah, just saying.
And I can tell you, having been a police officer for 21 years, I had the halo effect. People tended not to do crimes right in front of me.
Yeah, how about that, huh?
Yeah, that was a halo effect. So
And we're not talking just shootings. Like having
No.
a constable
No, really.
present in
assaults and
fighting,
thefts
yeah.
and drugs
just-
and
Which, unfortunately, in our district and throughout the state, I mean, those numbers are on the rise.
continue to go up.
Those numbers, continue to go.
And honestly, that's a big reason why a lot of people want to put their children into charter schools and private schools,
private
is
schools.
because
That's correct.
there are issues in the public schools that are not being addressed.
Right.
And
I-
what an easy way to do something about
Well,
it.
and I will, if I may touch on the funding issue of education for a second.
Oh, sorry.
So that's okay. So basically, you asked me where can we cut costs and so forth and so on. A couple areas. First and foremost, we have districts, and again, with no disrespect for these districts, but you've got districts, 19 to be exact, plus charters, plus VOTEC.
Charters,
But actually, I wasn't going there, but we can go there.
Okay.
But I was, because I think I know where you're going, Jim. But we have districts that have schools that are half empty, more than half empty.
Yeah.
And there's no thought process because it's kind of one of these, oh yeah. If I'm a lawmaker from, wherever, doesn't matter, let's consolidate those schools there, because that makes sense. And then we have,
You would think.
we would think, don't mess with my district. I mean, that's unfortunately tends to be the outgrowth of those types of. Same thing with, if I may touch on the number of school districts. It's ridiculous that a state the size of Delaware has the 19 school districts plus the VOTEX plus the charters.
Right.
And there was a work group put together a number of years ago that took a look at this issue. And I wasn't part of the work group. I attended several meetings as a guest or as a member of the public. And the number of my colleagues that basically said, yeah, that's a great idea. We can combine, this district into that district and so forth and so on. But don't touch my districts. I mean, so that's a large dilemma that we're facing. And honestly, this issue could be addressed. There's no doubt. There's no reason why it can't. It cannot be dealt with by the General Assembly. I mean, ultimately, we would need to be the ones. But a working group of lawmakers to talk about whose district's going to get cut, you can imagine that was a big hot waste of time.
So just some high level concepts. Why is having 19 districts and in the charters, why is that difficult, or why is that?
Well, it's difficult, frankly, from a fiscal perspective, Rob,
Sure.
because if you think about it, you've got 19, superintendents. You've got significantly more, probably more than 100 assistant superintendents. It's the hierarchy, Rob, where those monies could be going into the classroom. It could be going to teachers.
Right.
And
So
instead,
could this be one of the reasons why Delaware is top 5 in spending per capita?
we're
And
correct me
bottom 5 in performance.
Yeah, I mean, we're probably close to, Chris, you probably know better than I, 20,000 a child?
Yeah.
North 22.
Yep.
So we're not really spending that money on the children then.
That's the problem.
If you go to the breakdown of what actually gets into the classroom, I would say that's very true.
Yep.
We had the Republican Party had adopted basically the concept of the late Ron Russo's BOLD plan.
Yep, I remember.
And his position was we don't minimize the impact of school boards because it's not the school board; it's what the school does.
Correct.
And have the power go back to the school. It was, it's on our. Well, I don't know if it's on our website, but anyway, we had the BOLD plan, and concepts like that are something that probably ought to be examined.
100%.
To continue to do the same thing over and over and over again, expecting different results.
And for somebody who doesn't know him, Ron Russo's he passed away recently, but he was a well-respected educator with a long track record
100%.
of success, and he helped create Wilmington Charter School,
Yeah, he was first
which is
principal,
is ranked one of the best high schools in America.
Agreed.
Right. So I mean, there's a lot of really good content and good example to build on there.
Agreed.
But we'll be spending some time on that coming up.
Good.
Again, we've been here a while, and I really appreciate you coming
Sure.
in. We would hope that you would be willing to come back.
Oh,
on a
anytime.
regular
No,
basis.
this has been awesome. I've truly enjoyed it.
Yeah,
Tell some of your friends so we can get them in here.
I'm
too.
going to.
Yeah.
100%. No, absolutely. Jim and I talked about that. No, I will make that happen.
So
Make that happen.
So yeah, as you can tell, the conversation just keeps going and
Yeah,
going.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
there's
gosh.
always something to talk about.
That's great.
we could literally be here for about 3 hours.
Sure.
Um,
Sure.
Until
We can't. Because then I have to lower the quality that I upload these videos to.
right. Yeah.
We can't have lower
Yeah,
quality
no.
video,
No,
Jim.
we can't. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's right.
And I did make a pot roast for dinner tonight. So
Oh, fair enough.
Yeah,
There
nice.
you go. There you
yeah,
go.
I made it.
Good. There you
Yeah,
go.
pretty simple. So anyway, well, listen. Once again, Kevin, thank you very much.
No, it's my
And,
pleasure. I've truly, like I said, love to come back anytime, and
all right, great.
really enjoyed it.
All right.
Wonderful.
So
Wonderful.
this is Kevin Hensley in the first. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.